Let's read the Pythagorean Sourcebook, an anthology of ancient writings which relate to Pythagoras and Pythagorean philosophy, compiled and translated by Kenneth Sylvan Guthrie. That's a good name. With additional translations by Thomas Taylor and Arthur Fairbanks, introduced and edited by David Fiedler, or Fiedler, with a foreword by Jocelyn Godwin and Alexandria Book Fanes Press. Published 1987 to 88 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Fanes.com. Printed in the United States of America. So we have illustrations, forward, preface, introduction, Pythagoras, number, cosmos, harmonia, the monochord, the mathematics of harmonic meditation, the tetractys, I think. Tetractys. Number as paradigm, the way of philosophy in 3 lives, soul, nature, and care, Pythagorean education, Pythagorean political and ethical theory, Pythagorean tradition and its development, philosophy of whole systems, notes to the introduction. Wow, that is just the introduction. And then part 1, the life of Pythagoras by Iamblichus of Chalcis, the importance of the subject, youth, study or journey in Egypt, study in Egypt, Babylonia, Greece, Croton, the community, achievements, intuition, reverence, temperance, community, chastity, youth, women, philosophy, Orpheus, pre-existence, medicine, music, asceticism, initiation, relationship with the Abaris, the Hyperborean. That'll be an interesting one. Psychological requirements, daily program, friendship, parables, dietary instructions, music and poetry, harmonics, political and social achievements, divinity, sciences, maxims, justice, temperance, fortitude, courage, friendship, attacks, and succession. The life of Pythagoras by Porphyry of Tyre. Anonymous life of Pythagoras preserved by Photius. Life of Pythagoras by Diogenes Laertius. Early life studies, initiations, transmigration, Pythagoras, views of life, ages of life, social customs, appearance, women, science, diet, sacrifices, measures, weights, Hesperus, Phosphorus, students, reputation, friendship, symbols, maxims, habits, teachings, testimonies, death, family, epigrams, letters, Empedocles. Part 2, the library. Symbols, verses, fragments, Ocellus Lucanus, the nature of the universe, laws, Hippodamus, the Thurian, felicity, republic, sanctity, kingdom, virtues, laws of Zaloicus, or Zale, I think it's Zaloicus, the Locrian, Charondas, the Catanian, felicity of families, harmony of a woman, apothegms, Aristoxenus of Tarentum, Perictione, Euryphamus, Hipparchus, Metopus, Crito, Polus, Sthenidas, the Locrian, Ecphantus, the Crotonian, Pempelus, Phaintis, daughter of Callicrates, Sextus the Pythagorean, I'm just pronouncing Greek badly here. I should have studied Greek. Hierocles, or Hierocles, conduct toward the gods, country, parents, fraternal love, marriage. Timaeus of Locri, passages from church fathers, Plato and Aristotle, doxographers, how many still can't pronounce this, tetractes are there, first 10 numbers, formation and ratios, list of figures. So we've gotten, I guess there's only 2 parts. Alright, we're in the foreword. If Western civilization has taken, as it seems, not one but several wrong turnings between the time of Pythagoras in the 6th century BC and the present, it is because it has been unfaithful to him, who should by rights have been its tutelary genius. Pythagoras is the very midwife of our epoch, ushering it to birth from the dusky mystical past, or mythic past, sowing the seeds of a new consciousness, a new possibility for growth after the plan laid up in heaven. His own story, accordingly, it's part myth, part ascertainable history, such divine figures as he inhabit both realms. His achievement is a prophetic one, for in his life and work he set forth the perfect framework for the unfoldment not only of classical Greek culture, but of the whole coming age up to our own time. The Pythagorean synthesis of religion with spiritual and natural philosophy would have been the ideal guide for a civilization whose destiny was to come to terms with the material world. Pythagoras set the stage for this development with a careful system of checks and balances. In his emphasis on number, the keystone of his doctrine, he revealed the secret without which modern technology would have been impossible. It is applied mathematics, after all, that has led to the so-called conquest of nature. But at the same time, and much more importantly, Pythagoras taught the metaphysical and sacred aspect of number as reflecting the one and its emanations. In this respect, the numbers, especially those from 1 to 10, are archetypal beings. To approach them as quantity alone is a denial of their nature verging on blasphemy. Is not the fault of Christianity that the idea of sacred number and geometry has vanished, along with any viable science based thereon. Nowhere are these things more evident than in the scriptures and rituals of the churches. It is the error of those who have forgotten the Pythagorean and Christian concept to honor first the immortal gods, themselves numbers, before embarking on any enterprise. Consequently, number today carries not meaning wisdom, but only information and power of a very dubious character. So I guess this is who's writing this forward? Is this Kenneth is writing the forward? Who wrote the forward again? Forward by Jocelyn Godwin. So who the heck? To be honest, who is Jocelyn? Because she sounds like a Pythagorean cultist. Oh, no. I'm sorry. Jocelyn is a man's name. Is this like, is he Welsh or something? Are the Welsh people who name their boys Jocelyn derived from Gautzelin? So it's actually German, apparently. A member of the German tribe, the Gauts. Okay, alright, fair enough. Gautzelin. Alright, so apparently he taught the Atlantis debate class, which focuses on the feasibility of the flood myth, as well as the Western esoteric tradition. Is this guy retired? I guess he's retired. So he's written a lot about the Western esoteric tradition. I don't know what his problem is with, like, if you're a Western esotericist, then I would look at, I don't know, current day stuff is pretty cool. Author of Arctos. Jocelyn Godwin's most popular book is Ride the Tiger, a survival manual for the aristocrats of the soul. Jocelyn Godwin, translator of Julius Evola. So, apparently, Jocelyn Godwin is a big fan of Julius Evola. So that kind of gives me a taste of who he is and what he's all about and why he is talking about Western civilization as being in some kind of low point because they forgot all of the mysteries of Pythagoras, Nazi occult beliefs. He's written a book about that, so that is interesting. I don't know. Let's get back to the Pythagorean source book because we still got like 400 pages to read here. How far? Well, if you just skip the introduction here, or the, what do they call it, the index. Applied mathematics, we already talked about that. The Pythagorean worldview is a graduated hierarchical one, with every stage filled by appropriate beings, divinities, lesser gods, daimons, heroes, geniuses, etc. It is in no way contrary to the Jewish, early Christian, and Islamic version of rank upon rank of angels, standing between God and the earth. Angels are unfashionable nowadays, and while in some respects it has been an advantage to bring the absolute closer to man, it has lost most of its absoluteness in becoming a personal God. Far better to worship the one within, but to recognize and cooperate with those beings who have to maintain the world against mankind's best efforts to spoil it. Given this orderly hierarchical universe, Pythagoreanism has no need to blandly oppose spirit to matter. Things are more subtle than that. Neither does it need to invent a fall of angels or of man that violates the divine order. The golden verses say, "Men are children of the gods, and sacred nature all things hid reveals." Everything proceeds according to a law that renders perfect justice to each, as surely as every physical action provokes an equal and opposite reaction. The one has no personality to make its favor or anger our concern. Since there is no fall except the periodic one of soul into body, there is no vicarious salvation. Only one's own efforts and acquired wisdom can free one from this migration around the states of being. Nevertheless, there is every reason for piety towards the gods and for gratitude to Pythagoras and those others who have taught the means to attain freedom through rational conduct in the philosophic life. Pythagoras' metaphysics enables the intellect to approach and know the ultimate truth. His moral precepts ensure conformity with the perfect goodness. To complete the Trinity, he also adored the supreme beauty which inspires the muses as they do our arts. In the first place, he seems to have used music, both for the intellectual benefits of its speculative side and for the effects of practical music on psychophysical health. Music is the art in which the numbers penetrate deeply or directly to the heart. In mathematics, they occupy the brain. But it is not music alone, it is not music alone that incarnates the transcendent virtues of number. As it does so in time, so the visual arts do in space, depending no less for their beauty on harmony and correct proportion. It was this knowledge that enabled classical Greek architecture and sculpture to attain such heights in the century after Pythagoras. Ever since then, the high points of Western and Islamic architecture have followed on the reapplication of harmonic principles, as one can prove by measurement of Gothic cathedrals, early Renaissance churches, and the masterpieces of Islamic architecture. Disobedience to harmonic laws leads to ugliness, which is a sin against the muses and a denial of the divinely beautiful order of the cosmos. Obedience to them, on the other hand, presupposes a state of soul open also to intelligible beauty. Music and architecture open our souls in the same way. When he came to teach, Pythagoras recognized that people too are arranged in a hierarchy, and that they vary enormously in their receptivity to philosophy. Some are little more than animals and require the same loving attentions, while others are little short of gods. Consequently, he reserved different degrees of teaching for the different levels. Much has been said about the secrecy of the most esoteric branch of his school, but like Plato and Jesus, he also involved himself in public life, often to his cost. As a political reformer and giver of laws to several cities, he provided a field for the improvement of all, even of the lowest types, for that is what politics should be about. Within his school, he went against contemporary custom in giving equal status to women. So we've already got Pythagoras is a feminist of the ancient world. We're talking about 600 years before Jesus Christ ever walked the earth, before Paul, the apostle, ever said, men and women are the same in Jesus Christ. You had Pythagoras saying that men and women are equal, which is, wow, that's incredible. I didn't know that one, did I? All right. His biographers are careful to record the name of his female disciples. So, I don't know. What is going? You had a bunch of very traditional women in this Pythagorean group here, I guess. I am sure that much evil would have been avoided had Western civilization not indulged in such parodies of the hierarchical principle as the simplistic division into saved and damned, and the restriction of public office and education to men alone. So he's saying, I'm sure much evil would have been avoided had Western civilization not indulged in parodies of hierarchical principles, such as the restriction of public office to men alone. So I guess, what is Jocelyn saying? Jocelyn is saying that we could have avoided much evil if we just allowed women to become educated and allowed them to become politicians, and that would be awesome. That's what Jocelyn believes. I'm a little bit skeptical, Jocelyn. I'm a little bit skeptical. But let's keep reading. Naturally, Pythagoras did not invent his philosophy. It was not original except in the brilliance of his synthesis. Since truth is perennial and invariable, to create an original philosophy is merely to hatch another untruth. Pythagoras' unique advantage was that he studied in every available school, philosophic and religious alike, Orphic by temperament. He also knew the early natural philosophers Thales and Anaximenes, I think. But far from stopping with Greece, he investigated the mysteries of Egypt, the science of Babylon, even the wisdom of the Hyperboreans, presumably the ancient Britons. I'm sure Jocelyn would say that. Yeah, the Hyperboreans must have been ancient Britons. Anyway, when he was in his 50s, he began to teach the distillation of what he had learnt. Some of it, such as his mystery initiations, he could not pass on. He retained, in fact, only what would be useful to the coming age in which those mysteries would decline and disappear. The discovery of the divine within oneself, the kingdom of heaven within you, was to be its goal, aided by contemplation of that which sacred nature reveals. There is no reason why this could have not been adapted to make an exoteric religion to serve the whole civilization. This actually seems to have been happening in the time of Caesar and the early Roman Empire, scene of so many religious might-have-beens. As it was, the Pythagorean strain survived only in its more esoteric cultivation by the Neoplatonic philosophers. Neoplatonism is to a very large degree Neo-Pythagorean. It shares the typical interests in theosophy, cosmology, arithmology, speculative music, and exotic religion. In fact, just as Platonists regard Aristotle as a rather limited successor to their master, so Pythagoreans may well regard the divine Plato. Since the end of the Roman Empire, Pythagoreans have periodically found shelter in the esoteric schools of Christianity and Islam. From time to time, their presence has manifested, especially in architecture and other arts. While I do not believe, as some do, that these schools can have been the motive force behind a history as disappointing as that of the West. Wow, disappointing as that of the West. Jocelyn, where is this great civilization? Is like Hindu India? Is that the Is that the civilization that didn't disappoint? Is it China? Is China the true traditionalist system that was not as disappointing as the West? I mean, this is like, wow, disappointing as the West. One should mention some of those who have publicly carried the torch. Marsilio Ficino in the 15th century cast Pythagoras as a link in his genealogy of Prisci Theologi. Hermes Trismegistus, Orpheus, Aglaophamus, Pythagoras, Philolaus, Plato. The astronomers Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler invoked the Pythagorean school as a precedent for their heliocentric astronomy. In Kepler's case, there was much more, including his researches into the geometry and harmony of the spheres. So does that mean Pythagoras was a heliocentrist? Well, let's keep reading. Let's find out. Later, there were two great romantic Pythagoreans, Thomas Taylor in the 18th century and Fabre de Olivet, also in the 18th century, perhaps the only ones up to their time who were not also Christians. Fabre, I don't know how you pronounce that, Fabre, published the Golden Verses in French with his remarkable commentary in 1813. Taylor published his Theoretic Arithmetic in 1816. His translation of Iamblichus's Life of Pythagoras, the basis of Guthrie's version in 1818. Largely as a consequence of the work of these two men, the 19th century swarms with semi-Pythagoreans, great and small, but all of rather limited effect on the world in general. A stronger impetus was given by the Theosophical school at the end of the 19th century and by the various esoteric groups that surrounded and derived from it. Kenneth Sylvan Guthrie's work belongs in this context, as does the better-known achievement of Manly Palmer Hall. And I'm going to sneeze soon. Excuse me, that was a good one. That was satisfying. All right, here we go. Our civilization is now, quite unconsciously, more imbued with Pythagorean influences than it has ever been. The evidence is plain to see wherever one looks in phenomenon as various as vegetarianism and the whole food movement, postmodernist architecture. Wow, so apparently postmodernist architecture is traditionally Pythagorean. That's interesting. The synthesis of religions, travelers in search of Oriental wisdom, researches into ancient Egypt and Babylon, the revivals of sacred geometry, arithmology, and speculative music. Yeah, that's definitely what I would... It's interesting what we would call postmodern music, things like Philip Glass. It appears that Pythagoras was really into that sort of stuff. Reprints of Pythagorean literature, meditation, music therapy, the speculations of modern physicists, communes, and spiritual communities, the widespread belief in reincarnation. Pythagoras is the center toward which all these scattered impulses point. If he failed as the avatar of the passing age, perhaps he is coming into his own as a new one dawns. Preface to the original edition of 1920. So we're done with Jocelyn, who I guess is the publisher of this whole thing, and we're going back in time to 1920. The reason that Pythagoreanism has been neglected and often treated mythically is that until this edition, all the Pythagorean fragments have never been collected in text or any translation. This book, therefore, marks an era in the study of philosophy and is needed by every university and general library in the world, not to mention those of the students of philosophy. So that's pretty a bold claim. It's like everybody needs this book right now. It's a good way to sell it. But there is yet a wider group of people who will welcome it, the lovers of wisdom in general, who will be charmed by Hierocles' modern views about the family. Oh, we got a modern family. Inspired by Iamblichus's beautiful Life of Pythagoras, which has been inaccessible for over a century. and strengthened by the maxims of Sextus, which represent the religious facts of the future more perfectly than can be easily found elsewhere. The universal culture of Pythagoras, you might call it a multiculture, is faithfully portrayed by the manifold aspects of the teaching of Archytas and Philolaus, and of many other Pythagoreans, among whose fragments we find dissertations on every possible subject: metaphysics, psychology, ethics, sociology, science, and art. Men of general culture, therefore, will feel the need of this encyclopedic information and study, and conversely, there is neither scientist, metaphysician, clergyman, literateur, or sociologist who will fail to discover herein something to his taste. It's a little bit for everyone. The Pythagorean fragments have been gathered from various sources. On Philolaus, I feel like I'm pronouncing the emphasis, Philolaus. I feel like Philolaus is a good way to say it. On Philolaus, the authority is Book. The Archytas fragments have been taken from Chignet and Frangigai, the minor works from Gale and Taylor, and the maxims and golden verses from Dacier. The work by Timaeus was taken from Plato's works, among which it has been preserved. This work was undertaken because of the great significance of these writings in the history of philosophy, which has elsewhere more definitely been pointed out, and for the sake of which, no doubt, the book will be procured by all students, philosophers, and general lovers of wisdom. It was undertaken for no purpose other than the benefit of humanity, that had for so long been deprived of its precious heritage, and the editor will be satisfied if he succeeds in restoring these treasures of thought and inspiration to his day and generation. That's by Kenneth Sylvan Guthrie. Preface to the new edition. This anthology is based on Kenneth Sylvan Guthrie's Pythagoras sourcebook and library, issued in a very small printing by the Platonist Press between 1919 and 1920. Guthrie's edition contained his own translations of ancient Greek writings, in addition to edited versions of writings initially translated by Thomas Taylor. In editing Taylor's translations, Guthrie carefully adhered to Taylor's renditions, but greatly improved the readability of the style. Guthrie's original translations include Porphyry's Life of Pythagoras, the anonymous Life of Pythagoras from Photius, the biography from Diogenes Laertius, and the fragments of Philolaus, and Archytas. Most of the remaining works were translated by Taylor, and their sources are noted in the bibliography under Pythagorean texts. In editing this work, I have repaired some awkward phrasings and have checked all of Guthrie's renditions against other translations, including those of Taylor. In addition to containing all the texts of Guthrie's original edition, much new material has been added as well. Additional translations by Arthur Fairbanks for new appendices, illustrations, index, bibliography, and a foreword and introduction. Throughout the production process, a number of individuals have graciously provided assistance, to whom thanks is due. Jocelyn Godwin, Steve Miller, Henry Morin, and Arthur Verslus were instrumental in helping with the proofreading, and Bob Tarta provided assistance with typography. I would also like to acknowledge the assistance of my father, Raymond E. Fideler, 1912 to 1986, without whose help and generosity this project might not have been completed. Unfortunately, he passed away before he could view the final results, so I'd like to dedicate my introductory essay with gratitude and affection to his memory. That's very, that's filial piety. That's what we call that. Oh boy, here we're getting to the introduction, guys. Those were just the forewords and the preface, but now we're coming to the introduction. It has been suggested by Alfred North Whitehead that the safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. If such be the case, what might be said of Pythagoras, to whose philosophy Plato was so greatly indebted? While no definitive answer will be attempted here, it might do well to note that not only did Pythagoras first employ the term philosophy and define the discipline thereof in the classical sense, but that he bequeathed to his followers and to the whole of Western civilization many important studies and sciences which he was instrumental in either formulating or systematizing. True as this may be, much mystery surrounds the figure of Pythagoras, despite the significant influence of Pythagorean thought in antiquity. Of course, many things can be precisely stated. He was both a natural philosopher and a spiritual philosopher, a scientist and a religious thinker. He was a political theorist, and was even involved in local government. While he may not have been the first to discover the ratios of the musical scale, with which he is credited, there can be no doubt that he did conduct extensive research into musical harmonics and tuning systems. Pythagoras is well known as a mathematician, but few realize that he was also a music therapist, having in fact founded the discipline. Pythagoras taught the kinship of all living things, hence he and his followers were vegetarians. Yet while all these things may be safely stated, quite a bit of mystery still remains. And we've got a nice footnote that we can click on here. Let's see where it takes us away from page 16. Notes to the introduction. References to writings appearing in this volume follow Guthrie's chapter divisions. It will not be my intention in this introductory essay to attempt to pierce through the various mysteries surrounding the figure of Pythagoras or to embark on the overwhelming task of textual criticism, nor do I desire to write much about the life of Pythagoras, seeing that all of the primary source material is presented in this volume. Rather, I will attempt to briefly sketch out the history of the Pythagorean school and its influence, discussing those doctrines which are generally agreed upon, and to provide some type of context into which the writings of this source book may be placed by the general reader. Indeed, I have tried to keep the general reader in mind throughout the introduction, and have limited more specialized comments to these notes, which also include references for further reading on topics which can only be touched upon here. Let's see if it takes us back. Yes, indeed. So, back to the introduction. This is due in large part to the fact that Pythagoras left no writings, although it is said he wrote some poems under the name of Orpheus. Footnote number 2. The source for this is Ion of Chios, quoted in a bunch of sources. Excellent. Pythagoras' teaching was of an oral nature. While he seems to have made some speeches upon his arrival in southern Italy to the populace, the true fruits of his philosophic inquiries were presented only to those students who were equipped to assimilate them. Pythagoras no doubt felt, like his later admirer Plato, that philosophic doctrines of ultimate concern should never be published, seeing that philosophy is a process, and that books can never answer questions, nor engage in philosophical inquiry. So that's interesting. For Plato's views on writings of this matter, see his 7th letter. Okay. Yet despite the lack of first-hand writings by Pythagoras himself, we need not be deterred. There is an immense amount of material in the biographies of Pythagoras, which goes back to a very early date, and it is certainly possible to sketch an accurate, if not complete, picture of early Pythagorean philosophy, even being quite specific on many points. All right, footnote number 4. Since Pythagoras left no writings, this presents the historian with some difficulties. What, in fact, can be safely attributed to Pythagoras? Moreover, what do we know about his life? At a very early date, a body of legends grew up around Pythagoras. Many of these beautiful and amusing stories are recorded in the biographies, which constitute the first part of the book. For a long time, due to the nearly miraculous accounts, certain scholars dismissed the biographies as late and unreliable. However, Aristotle, in his lost monograph on the Pythagoreans, emphasized how Pythagoras was seen at 2 places at once, how he showed his golden thigh, How he was thought to be the Hyperborean Apollo. Oh boy, that's an interesting one. How he was addressed by a certain river. Obviously, these stories are not late Neo-Pythagorean inventions, but go back to the time of Plato or before. Another source of these accounts was the tripod of Andron of Ephesus, who was roughly contemporary with Aristotle, while the interpretive dimension of Iamblichus's biography was certainly colored by later Neo-Pythagorean and Neoplatonic influence. It is now taken for granted that the biographies contain a great deal of information about Pythagoras and his schools, and much of the information is taken from older authorities whose work has since perished. Some of the earliest authorities include Timaeus of Tauromenium, who wrote a history of Sicily, which contained information of the Pythagoreans and the speeches of Pythagoras, and Dicaearchus of Messina, a pupil of Aristotle who wrote a comprehensive study of Greek history, which treated the Pythagoreans. Another student of Aristotle, Aristoxenos of Tarentum, wrote several works on the Pythagoreans used by later biographers, drawing on early sources of first-hand contact. Okay, great. We go back. Let us begin with Pythagoras himself. Pythagoras. The primary sources of information about the life of Pythagoras are to be found in this anthology. In addition to containing quite a bit of information about Pythagoras, which goes back to an early date, these four biographies also demonstrate in an admirable fashion the high esteem in which the philosopher was held. Pythagoras was born around 570 BC to it's like an MN, like mnemonic, but Mnesarchus of Samos, a gem engraver, and his wife Pythes. The biographies of Pythagoras are unanimous that at an early age he traveled widely to assimilate the wisdom of the ancients wherever it might be found. He is said by Iamblichus to have spent some 22 years in Egypt studying there with the priests, and it is also said to have, and he is also said to have studied the wisdom of the Chaldeans firsthand. I don't know, man. If this is like the second, third edition of an anthology, you'd think some of the proofreading would be better. These accounts are generally accepted by most scholars, as indeed they should be, owing to the high degree of contact between Asia Minor and other cultures, although it is doubtful, while not impossible, that he traveled to Persia to study the teachings of Zoroaster. In these distant lands, Pythagoras not only studied the sciences there cultivated, including mathematical sciences, we may safely presume, but also initiated into the religious mysteries of the barbarians. As Porphyry succinctly observes, it was from his stay among these foreigners that Pythagoras acquired the greater part of his wisdom. After his studies abroad, Pythagoras returned home to the island of Samos, where he continued his philosophical researches. It is said that he outfitted a cave especially designed for the study of philosophy, and it was there that he made his home. About this time, Pythagoras opened his first school, as we are told by Porphyry. Yet it was probably not long-lived, as Pythagoras decided to leave Samos at the age of 40, owing to the tyranny of Polycrates, which was then flourishing. From Samos, Pythagoras journeyed to South Italy, arriving at Croton, conceiving that his real fatherland must be the country containing the greatest number of the most scholarly men. That's a quote from Iamblichus' Life of Pythagoras, chapter 5. For all we know, and here it's saying Iamblichus, but before it's spelled Iamblichus, so I'm kind of at a loss here. For all we know, Pythagoras may have been invited to go to Croton. While this, to my knowledge, has not been previously suggested, it seems unlikely that he would have moved his teaching activities to a distant city without having some contact with and knowledge of the inhabitants. If this is correct, it would help explain his rapid acceptance by the populace. It would seem that his population preceded the philosopher, or his reputation preceded the philosopher, for he was shortly asked to speak to the populace of Croton, men, women, and children, on the proper conduct of life. The essence of these speeches is found in the biography by Iamblichus. While obviously not recorded verbatim, it seems quite likely that the content of these talks is genuinely Pythagorean and goes back to Pythagoras himself. Footnote 7. See Fogel, Pythagoras, and blah, 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 sources. According to the biographies, the populace was enthralled by the wisdom of this man, owing to which he was invited to become involved in the local government. Number, cosmos, harmonia. And the ancients, who are superior to us and dwelt nearer to the gods, have handed down a tradition that all things that are said to exist consist of a one and a many, and contain in themselves the connate principles of limit and unlimitedness. Plato, Philebus 16c. Where Pythagoras developed his interest in number, we do not know, although it is likely that he was not the first to be concerned with its sacred or metaphysical dimension. What we do know is that a metaphysical philosophy of number lay at the heart of his thought and teaching, permeating, as we shall see, even the domains of psychology, ethics, and political philosophy. The Pythagorean understanding of number is quite different from the predominantly quantitative understanding of today. For the Pythagoreans, number is a living qualitative reality which must be approached in an experiential manner, whereas the typical modern usage of number is as a sign to denote a specific quantity or amount. The Pythagorean usage is not, in a sense, even a usage at all. Number is not something to be used, rather its nature is to be discovered. In other words, we use numbers as tokens to represent things, but for Pythagoreans, number is a universal principle, as real as light, electromagnetism, or sound. As modern physics has demonstrated, it is precisely the numeric vibrational frequency of electromagnetic energy, the wavelength, which determines its particular manifestation. Pythagoras, of course, had already determined this in the case of sound. Because Pythagorean science possessed a sacred dimension, number is seen not only as a universal principle, it is a divine principle as well. The two, in fact, are synonymous. Because number is universal, it is divine, but one could as easily say that because it is divine, it is universal. Hence, the aim of Pythagorean and later Platonic science is different from that of modern Aristotelian science. It is not so much involved with the investigation of things as the investigation of principles. So, being more concerned with rules rather than empiricism, but there is a universalism here that's important to note. It should be firmly emphasized, however, that for the Pythagoreans, the scientific and religious dimensions of number were never at odds with one another. Moreover, the Pythagorean approach to number for the first time in Greece elevated mathematics to a study worth pursuing above any purely utilitarian ends for which it had previously been employed. The Pythagoreans believed that number is the principle, the source, and the root of all things. Footnote 8 is a source. But to make things more explicit, the monad, or unity, is the principle of number. In other words, the Pythagoreans did not see the one as a number at all, but the principle underlying number, which is to say that numbers, especially the first 10, may be seen as manifestations of diversity in a unified continuum. Footnote 9. This concept that the one or principle of unity is the source of all numbers is easily grasped if one envisions the one as a circle in which various polygons are inscribed. The polygons or numbers contained within the circle may then be seen as various manifest aspects of the underlying unity. Another analogy is found in Pythagorean harmonics. The monochord, symbolizing unity, innately contains the entire overtone series. 2 divided by 1, 3 by 1, 4 by 1, 5 by 1, etc., which is manifested when the string is plucked. To quote Theon of Smyrna, unity is the principle of all things and the most dominant of all that is. All things emanate from it, and it emanates from nothing. It is indivisible, and it is everything in power. It is immutable, and never departs from its own nature through multiplication. 1 times 1 equals 1. Everything that is intelligible and not yet created exists in it. The nature of ideas, God himself, the soul, the beautiful and the good, and every intelligible essence, such as beauty itself, justice itself, equality itself. For we conceive each of these things as being one and as existing in itself. If one represents the principle of unity, from which all things arise, then 2, the dyad, represents duality, the beginning of multiplicity, the beginning of strife, yet also the possibility of logos, the relation of one thing to another. The first increase, the first change from unity, is made by the doubling of unity, which becomes 2, in which are seen matter, and all this is perceptible, the generation of motion, multiplication and addition, composition, and the relationship of one thing to another. With the dyad arises the duality of subject and object, the knower and the known. With the advent of the triad, however, the gulf of dualism is bridged, for it is through the third term that a relation or harmonia, joining together, is obtained between the two extremes. While 2 represents the first possibility of logos, the relation of one thing to another, the triad achieves that relation in actuality. If this process of emergence is represented graphically in Figure 1, we can see that the triad not only binds together the 2, but also that the process centrally reflects the nature of the one in the microcosmic balanced fashion. So Figure 1 is just this figure in case you're curious. You want to see, maybe you can see what's going on here. You can pause the video and you can check that out. It's just a circle, and then you've got 2 circles inside the circle representing duality, like meiosis and mitosis, or whatever those biology terms are. And then you see like a ripple effect where a third circle is introduced in between the 2 circles as like thesis, antithesis, synthesis, Hegelianism. Okay, so what page are we on? We're on page 20, and we've gotten to our first little thing here. Just checking. It's taken us 47 minutes to get here. So it's probably going to take a good 20 hours to finish the book at this rate. I mean, that's pretty intense. 20 hours. Probably less, because the end of the book is probably a bunch of like footnotes and whatever. So let's say rather than 20 hours, let's give it a good 10 hours. So it's going to be like a 10-part series of me reading this book. And I think we're going to stop there because, you know, because we don't actually get to Iamblichus until, what page is this? Page 62. So from page 20 to page 62, we have quite a ways to go. So that'll maybe be the goal for next time, but at least we have a visual bookmark here. We can look back at this and we can say we got to page 20, and next time maybe we'll double. We'll have less commentary. We'll just be reading through it, and we'll try to get to page 62. But who knows? We might only get to page 40. You know, we'll say that's enough for today. We'll say more is coming next time. We'll say maybe I'll fix the camera angle here. Maybe I'll get more into the shot like this if I choose to do that next time. But hey, thank you for listening and for joining me on this process of education. We're going to learn some stuff, and it's going to be interesting. So stay tuned. The journey's not over. It's only just begun. Thanks for listening. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.